Hey everyone, Dave here, and welcome to Tolkien Adaptation Month 2, back in The Hobbit. Last year I began our celebration of 20 years of Fellowship of the Ring by listing my complaints about Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies. Now we're celebrating 20 years of The Two Towers, the movie that some of my biggest complaints came from, the movie that was arguably changed the most from the book. So to honor that movie, now I want to talk about the changes the movies made to the books that I like. So welcome back to Tolkien Month, and welcome back to the D-List, the show where I list things and my name begins with a D. Yes, many fans don't want to admit it, but not every difference between source material and adaptation is inherently a bad thing. Sometimes doing things a little bit different from the text can still make for an enjoyable movie. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that these changes are improvements from the book, but I generally think these were the right choices for this particular film adaptation. And much like last year, some of these are big changes, but a lot of these are really tiny things that a lot of casual readers wouldn't even notice. But they're tiny things that actually do make a big difference when you think about them. And I think the difference was worth it in these cases. So we'll get to the list in a moment. But first, 2 honorable mentions. Honorable mention number 1. Giving the Balrog wings. Now this is an honorable mention because Jackson didn't think he was making a change here.
And he's got wings.
He has got wings. I read the book and I imagine Tolkien's describing wings. I don't know what the big fuss is about.
Now, the do Balrogs have wings debate has been covered extensively elsewhere. I don't need to get into the details, but the point is there's enough ambiguity in the text to keep the debate going. Now, personally, I don't think the book does describe the Balrog as having literal wings, so I think this is a change to the text, but I think the Balrog looks cooler with wings than it would without them, so I like it. Honorable mention number 2.
Where to begin?
Telling the story chronologically. This is an honorable mention because this change wasn't invented by this adaptation. Most adaptations do it, and it's not really a change to the story so much as the presentation of the story, but it's worth noting because it's a change that Tolkien himself had opinions on. So for those of you who haven't read the trilogy, it's not actually a trilogy, it's actually 6 books. Each of the 3 books contain 2 books, totaling 6 books. Book 3, which is the first half of The Two Towers, goes back and forth between following Aragorn and his crew into Rohan and following Merry and Pippin into Fangorn. And Book 4, the second half of Two Towers, follows Frodo and Sam into Mordor. And then books 5 and 6 in Return of the King are split similarly. Tolkien really believed that the scenes should be experienced in the order he presented them, but let me tell you, when I first read The Two Towers when I was too young for it, I found myself bored by all the Rohan stuff in Book 3 and just waiting for it to get back to Frodo and Sam. And then when it did get back to Frodo and Sam in Book 4, I found myself bored by all the trudging through Mordor. Now, rereading the trilogy as an adult, I'm not bored. I appreciate both of these books a lot, but I just kept waiting as a kid for it to get to the parts I wanted to hear about, and so I would have been grateful for the pacing of the film as a child, and I think it's the right call to make here, even if Tolkien himself would disagree with me. And now on to the list proper. Number 14. Increasing the urgency. Now, this isn't a single specific moment so much as a general strategy that was applied throughout the adaptation, and it's a strategy that I think was the right move, at least most of the time. Lord of the Rings has a reputation for being kind of a slow read. It luxuriates in long descriptions of parts of the journey, and yeah, people often make fun of it for being just a lot of descriptions of landscape and people walking. So the movie decided to increase the urgency of that walking. I don't mean increase the stakes. The stakes were always high, even in the book, but you know, it's a less leisurely journey than it seems to be when you're reading the book. Now, the way that they increased the urgency urgency, it was actually many ways. One of them is cutting the 17 years that passed between Bilbo's party and Frodo going on the quest.
17 years passed sleepily in the Shire.
And especially cutting all the time Frodo waited after hearing about the truth of the ring before actually setting out on the journey.
We must leave, and leave quickly.
I mean, I like how strategic Frodo is about it in the book, but I don't know if general movie audiences would have accepted Frodo learning that he basically has a doomsday device and keeping it any longer than he has to threatens him and the entire Shire, and then being like, well, I'll just wait several months, maybe I'll go on my birthday. Another example of increasing the urgency is making Frodo much weaker when stabbed by the Morgul blade. Obviously in the book, he is in severe pain, and he basically just gets to Rivendell in the nick of time, but after being stabbed at Weathertop, he's still kinda lighthearted and jovial. I mean, he's trying to keep up his lighthearted energy, obviously, he's making an effort, but he's joking around with the hobbits about the trolls and stuff. I think it works in the movie that he is basically unable to say anything between Weathertop and Rivendell.
Look, Frodo, it's Mr. Bilbo's trolls. Mr. Frodo?
Speaking of which, the flight to the fort is another place where they kind of cut out the waiting between Glorfindel's arrival and Frodo's departing to Rivendell.
There are 5 wraiths behind you. Where the other 4 are, I do not know.
It's probably for the best that it's just immediately, boom, the Black Riders are on your tail.
Ride hard. Don't look back.
Naralim, Asfaloth, Naralim.
There's also in the book a much larger span of time between Pippin making the noise in the well in Moria and the orcs descending upon them. I like how in the movie it's basically, here's this sound, now all the bad guys are here.
Frodo. Orcs.
Increasing the urgency also includes amping up the action sequences in the book. Some things that aren't really described as being action sequences are turned into action sequences in the movie, such as the escape across the Brandywine River. In the book, a Black Rider wasn't, like, right on top of them or anything. They get on the ferry, but in the distance they see sinisterly the Black Rider looking for them. I think that could have been a very cool and effective creepy scene, but I think this escaping by the seat of their pants also makes for a very exciting film scene.
How far to the nearest crossing?
The Brandywine Bridge. 20 miles.
Granted, not every increase of action sequences is a good thing. Sometimes it can go too far. So it would probably surprise everyone to know that Jackson actually cut an action sequence from the book. Between Caradhras and Moria, there's actually a warg attack that just doesn't happen in the movie. Well, doesn't happen in this movie. I suspect that the warg attack that does happen in the Two Towers movie, that doesn't happen in that book, is just this warg attack being transplanted, but I don't know. Also just everyone fighting and arguing and yelling at each other in the Council of Elrond. I've seen people criticize this for making the council seem a lot more foolish than the actual wise council they were supposed to be in the book, and I get that criticism, but I actually like the way this really amps up Frodo's anxiety and just drives him to make the choice he has to make. Now again, I'm not saying this is better than the book, because the slower pace of the events in the book is one of the things that make it feel like you're reading a real history when you're reading the pages of the text. And picking up the pace is exactly what a real biopic of said real history would do. So in a way, amping up the tension and the action kinda serves the meta-narrative of the book. The historians told it one way, and Hollywood told it another way. Number 13. Conflating characters. Some characters are just eliminated from the movie altogether, and some characters have their roles replaced by other characters who are already in the story. And for the most part, I think these were the right call to make. For example, one of the most famous, replacing Glorfindel with Arwen.
Frodo. Im Arwen Telin Lethide.
Look, Glorfindel's awesome, but the movie, even in the extended edition, did not have time to go into how awesome he is. It makes sense to replace him with someone else who would be in the story, and it makes sense to replace him with the right kind of elf, Bakshi. So, if you're going to amplify Arwen's role anyway, and it makes sense to amplify Arwen's role for many other reasons, it makes sense to replace Glorfindel with Arwen.
Arwen's great!
Similarly, replacing Erkenbrand with Eomer. Yes, technically Bakshi did this one first, but in this case especially, I really think it was the right move.
Theoden King stands alone. Not alone.
Theoden lost his son and cast out his nephew while he was under Saruman's spell, so when he feels absolutely no hope, it's really, really emotional when that nephew he cast out comes back for him. Sorry, Erkenbrand, you're just not as interesting.
The stupid Eomer.
Number 12. Treebeard bringing Merry and Pippin to the White Wizard. Last year I went into the end stuff that I hated, but here's something I liked.
The White Wizard will know.
The White Wizard.
Saruman.
Yeah, this moment doesn't happen in the book. In fact, Merry and Pippin are the ones who have to tell Treebeard that Gandalf fell in Moria. So I like here not only that they have this sort of misdirect where you think Treebeard might be evil and bringing them to Saruman, but I also like that Merry and Pippin get a little bit of hope here. They had just been through a lot. It's nice that they get to be the first to find out that Gandalf came back.
Merry and Pippin are quite safe.
It was really nice of Gandalf to give the hobbits this little bit of hope, and to give the rest of the Fellowship hope about the hobbits. Not that his positive attitude towards the hobbits lasts very long.
Hobbits. This new Gandalf's more grumpy than the old one.
Number 11. Gandalf's reluctance to enter Moria. In the book, when all other paths seem hopeless, Gandalf suggests going through Moria, which Gimli is intrigued by. And it's actually Aragorn who's nervous about the idea of going through Moria, and actually warns Gandalf against doing so. Of course, in the film, this was not how things played out.
I would not take the road through Moria unless I had no other choice.
I like this change because I just like the tragedy of it. I like that Gandalf knows that whatever fate meets him in Moria, it's not going to be good.
Moria. You fear to go into those mines. The dwarves delved too greedily and too deep.
I mean, obviously, it's not his final fate in Moria, but if you're a first-time viewer, you don't know that, and I really like the tragedy here of Gandalf really trying to avoid this fate and just having to do it because it's what the Fellowship needs.
So be it.
An additional note about Moria, in the book, Gimli is excited to see the halls of his people, but he is not nearly as optimistic about Balin being there as he is in the film.
My cousin Balin would give us a royal welcome.
But of course, readers of the book already knew Balin in The Hobbit, so when they find Balin's tomb, it's heartbreaking for us because we had an adventure with him. An adventure where he was the dwarf who showed Bilbo the most kindness.
Oh, no.
But people seeing the movies first would have had no emotional attachment to Balin, so having Gimli caught by surprise by his loss was a brilliant way to give that moment even a sliver of the weight it had in the text. Number 10. The Elves at Helm's Deep. I'm probably gonna get hate for this. I don't care. I love that the elves show up to help. Maybe I'm just too annoyed by the other major beat changes in Two Towers to be annoyed by this one too, but I think it's great that there's a new Last Alliance of Elves and Men. It's like this and Faramir and the Ents are the big three changes to Two Towers, and I hate those other two, and I love this one.
An alliance once existed between elves and men. Long ago we fought and died together. We come to honor that allegiance.
I think it really fits in with one of Tolkien's themes, specifically about how evil endures when good people don't bandy together to stand up to it. So it's nice that the good men have good elves come bandy with them.
We are proud to fight alongside men once more.
I know there are legitimate reasons to not like this change, especially for lore purists, but I like it. Number 9. Galadriel knowing about Gandalf. I just realized a lot of these are Moria-centric. I don't know what that means. In the book, when the Fellowship arrives in Lothlorien, Galadriel asks where Gandalf is. In the movie, her lines here were given to Celeborn, and Galadriel knows Gandalf fell, even if it's ambiguous how many details she knows.
Tell me, where is Gandalf? For I much desire to speak with him.
So it's kind of ambiguous if she knew the whole time that Gandalf had fallen, or if she could read it in the Fellowship's thoughts, because she is kind of saying it like she's just finding it out for the first time.
He has fallen into shadow.
But either way, she doesn't need to ask. And that's the kind of mysterious that I like for Galadriel. I mean, I already mentioned how I don't love how creepy Lothlorien is the whole time around, but Galadriel being mysterious, I'm all about that. I just like wise old characters who are vague and mysterious. How much does she know? Does she know everything? She seems to be able to be reading people's minds. Is there anything Galadriel doesn't know?
Do you know everything? I really don't know, sir.
Number 8. Éowyn and Theoden's final moment. Theoden's death is sad in the movie, but in the book there's an added heartbreaking irony to it. He closed his eyes and Merry bowed beside him. Presently he spoke again. I would send word to Éowyn. She would not have me leave her, and now I shall not see her again. Dearer than daughter. Lord, began Merry brokenly. She is... But at that moment there was a great clamor, and all around them horns and trumpets were blowing. And then further down the page, slowly Theoden opened his eyes. Seeing the banner, he made a sign that it should be given to Éomer. Hail, King of the Mark, he said. Ride now to victory. Bid Éowyn farewell. And so he died, and knew not that Éowyn lay near him. Yeah, it's great writing, it's heartbreaking, it's tragically ironic, it's beautiful. But I'm really glad that in the movie Theoden got one last moment with Éowyn, and that he got to know that she was a warrior.
I am going to save you.
You already did.
It's still heartbreaking in the movie, but at least there's this added sense of closure, which I appreciate as a filmgoer watching a movie about light shining through the darkness. Number 7. Gandalf doesn't touch the ring. So there are some parts in the book where Gandalf seems to handle the ring a little more casually than he does in the movie. Not casually, just more casually. You still have got the ring in your pocket, said the wizard. Well, so I have, cried Bilbo. And my will and all the other documents too. You had better take it and deliver it for me. That will be safest. No, don't give the ring to me, said Gandalf. Put it on the mantelpiece. It will be safe enough there till Frodo comes. I shall wait for him. Bilbo took out the envelope, but just as he was about to set it by the clock, his hand jerked back and the packet fell on the floor. Before he could pick it up, the wizard stooped and seized it and set it in its place. So sure, Gandalf doesn't physically touch the ring here, he just touches the envelope, much like he does in the movie, but still I think going straight from don't hand it to me to here I'm gonna pick it up would read as kinda silly to a movie-going audience. But then later in chapter 2, after Gandalf returns from his research trip, he does physically hold the ring to examine it for markings.
Can you see any markings on it?
I like that in the movie, Gandalf doesn't physically touch the ring at any point. He holds the envelope, like he does earlier in the book, and he holds the ring with tongs, but his skin never makes contact with the ring, and he doesn't even pick it up himself. He comes close, but he stops. It helps visually make the ring feel more dangerous. If such a powerful and wise wizard is afraid to even touch the ring, boy, this thing must be bad. Number 6. Sam's speech at the end of the Two Towers. Look, I hate everything about Faramir taking the hobbits to Gondor. I hate everything about that subplot, but I do like that it led to the speech Sam gives.
It's like in the great stories, Mr. Frodo. The ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were. And sometimes you didn't want to know the end. Because how could the end be happy?
It's such a good speech. It's such a good way to emotionally wrap up the movie. It does set up the later conversation that's actually from the text about their story. And it's really good. I really think they could have gotten there without character assassination for Faramir, but you know, it's a very good speech, and it really helps give the movie structure when they had already chopped off the beginning and the end of the book and put them in different movies.
There's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo. And it's worth fighting for.
Number 5. Mary's no questions asked attitude. One of my favorite chapters in book 1 is A Conspiracy Unmasked. What happens in this chapter is Frodo has to tell Merry and Pippin that he's not actually settling down in Buckland. He's leaving the Shire, possibly forever, on this really dangerous journey. But when he attempts to tell Merry and Pippin about it, they already know. Not only do they know about the quest, they know about the ring, and they're willing to do whatever Frodo needs to keep the quest going. It's a great chapter that really showcases both the loyalty of the hobbits and their cleverness, their ability to make these plans all in the name of supporting each other, even at danger to themselves. So I don't love that we lose that chapter in the movie, but I do love what replaces it.
I have to leave the Shire. Sam and I must get debris.
Right. Buckleberry Ferry, follow me.
Yeah, here in the movie, Merry doesn't know about the ring, he doesn't know about the quest, he just knows that Frodo really needs help and it's serious, and he is all in. And at the end of the first movie, there's another added scene where Merry and Pippin see Frodo leaving on his own, so once again, they immediately do whatever it takes to help him.
He's leaving. Run, Frodo, go. Hey, you! Over here!
Movie Merry is just down for whatever for his friends. You need to get to Bree, Merry's your guy. You need to move, Merry's there with his pickup truck. You need a body buried, Merry only asks how big a hole you need. So no, this version of Merry and Pippin don't always come off as smart or as wise as the book characters, but they are just as loyal, and this is a fantastic way of showing it. Number 4. Saruman wants to work with Sauron. So not only was Saruman's role amplified for the movie, his motivations were also changed. In the book, Saruman wants the ring for himself. He wants to be a great power in Middle-earth, and he thinks that he can wield the ring.
And why not, Gandalf? He whispered. Why not the ruling ring? If we could command that, then the power would pass to us. That is in truth why I brought you here. For I have many eyes in my service, and I believe that you know where this precious thing now lies. Is it not so? Or why do the Nine ask for the Shire? And what is your business there? Saruman, I said, standing away from him. Only one hand at a time can wield the one, and you know that well, so do not trouble to say we. But I would not give it. Nay, I would not give even news of it to you, now that I learn your mind. You were head of the council, but you have unmasked yourself at last. Well, the choices are, it seems, submit to Sauron or to yourself. Against the power of Mordor, there can be no victory. We must join with him, Gandalf. We must join with Sauron.
I think both motivations are clear and effective, but I do think movie audiences would have trouble believing that Saruman was so wise if he actually believes that he can control this ring that just controls everybody who tries to control it.
I did not seriously think that a hobbit could contend with the will of Sauron. There are none who can.
On the other hand, Saruman being opportunistic, Saruman being pragmatic, Saruman just believing that this is the best horse to back, that's more believable from someone renowned for their wisdom. I mean, it's not wisdom, but it is, thinking, well, this is the best move right now.
It would be wise, my friend.
Plus, outright declaring a union between the two towers probably helped stop people from asking why the second movie was called that.
To stand against the might of Sauron and Saruman, and the union of the two towers.
Number 3. Merry recognizing Éowyn. So in the book, when Éowyn goes off to battle, she goes in disguise as a soldier named Durnhelm, and even Merry does not recognize her. He doesn't realize it's Éowyn until she slays the Witch King, and he's just like, oh crap, it's Éowyn.
'Tis Lord Theoden's niece!
Now, I do like that in the book, Merry feels like he's completely alone when he's going off into battle, but I also like in the movie that Merry and Éowyn have this bond.
Whatever happens, stay with me. I'll look after you.
Both of them have been told they don't belong here, but both of them need to be here. So I'm glad that they're here together. And it's just another great example of movie Merry being down for anything. Like, he thinks he's not going to get to go to battle, but then he's there with Éowyn and he's like, okay, this could work out.
Ride with me. My
lady. Number 2. The Army of the Dead. So in the book, Aragorn just uses the Army of the Dead to get the ships. They don't actually come to the Battle of Pelennor Fields and fight. That would have been really underwhelming in a movie. It is much, much cooler to actually see them fight in the battle.
We fight.
Like, could you imagine watching the movie, watching them go into the Paths of the Dead, encountering all these ghosts, and then find that it basically just amounted to a side quest? At that point, you might as well do the Rankin Bass thing of just having them appear on ships out of nowhere.
As the flagship standard broke the wind, it displayed the sign no lord had borne for years, and which only one lord could bear.
And Aragorn being true to his word allows them to address the question of why the Army of the Dead doesn't continue to fight with them in the next battle.
I hold your oath fulfilled. Go. Be at peace.
I'm just saying, it is much better in an action movie to have a worthwhile payoff to your Chekhov's ghost. And my number 1 favorite change that the Lord of the Rings movies made to the books, number 1 is the most famous cut from book to screen. So famous, in fact, that a lot of you thought I was building to it in last year's list. But nope, the change that I like best for the movie, the change that I think more than any was 100% the right call for this particular adaptation of Lord of the Rings, cutting Tom Bombadil. This was the right call, but not necessarily for the reasons you might think. Tom Bombadil is a divisive figure. There are fans of the book who outright hate him. It's often said that he contributes very little to the plot, that he has world-breaking powers, that his inexplicable presence throws a wrench in the otherwise intricately crafted lore and history Tolkien worked so hard on. Me? I love him. I think his chapters are fun and exciting, and I think he's a delightful presence in the world of Middle-earth. I think the fact that Tolkien's otherwise intricate world contains a detail that even he didn't fully understand makes the world all the richer. But unlike the Scouring, I think removing him from the film version of the world was the right call. So what is the narrative function of the Bombadil episode? Well, pragmatically, it gives the hobbits ponies, swords, and instructions to go to the Prancing Pony. Those elements were easily either dropped or shuffled around.
Make for the village of Bree.
Bree. What about you?
I'll be waiting for you at the Inn of the Prancing Pony.
These are for you. Keep them close.
And if you look at the edit, we don't know that they didn't go into the Old Forest. We don't know that they didn't meet Tom.
We just know that they didn't get the same stuff from that journey. But in terms of the arc, the Old Forest's role is much more tonal, because the Old Forest marks the transition between the kid-friendly feel of The Hobbit and the more serious feel of the rest of Lord of the Rings. We've already gotten hints at this point in the book that things are going to get darker here. The Shadow of the Past tells us that the stakes are much grander, and we've already been on the run from Black Riders. But this chapter is where the transition becomes real, because here we have Tom Bombadil, the fairy taliest of fairy tale characters, a character who would feel right at home in The Hobbit. The time spent in his house honestly echoes the time spent in Beorn's house pretty closely. And then we immediately go to the Barrow-wights, the scariest creatures the hobbits have ever encountered. This is the first real, legitimate peril that the hobbits face directly, and they can't get through it without Tom's help. But they still come through the other side better prepared for how dark the journey ahead will get. I love it, and I think it works great in the book. But the movie didn't need that tonal shift because the movie didn't start with The Hobbit. There was nothing to transition from. And instead, that pivotal moment of facing danger head on, not being able to take it on yourself, but being able to take it on with help from outsiders, that's given to Weathertop and the Flight to the Ford. and Bombadil is replaced with Aragorn and Arwen. Now, especially Flight to the Ford, because in the book, Glorfindel sent Frodo on the horse alone, and then Frodo had to stand up to the riders himself.
By all the Shire, you shall have neither the ring nor me!
Frodo in the movie is clearly not capable of standing up to the riders himself because of that aforementioned heightened urgency, so Arwen being there to stand up for the riders, that's the movie's equivalent of Bombadil being there to stand up to the Barrow-wights.
If you want him, come and claim him.
So every function of the Bombadil episode in the book was deftly handled elsewhere in the movie. And again, I love the Bombadil episode in the book, and I would love to see it brought to the screen, like a short film that's just the House of Tom Bombadil. And I'd love an animated short that's based on the poetry book of Tom Bombadil. And, you know, let's get Bombadil to show up in Rings of Power at some point. I want to see more Bombadil. But Peter Jackson didn't need Bombadil for his movie, so cutting him was the right call. And there you have it, the changes to the movies that I liked, 1 year after the changes to the movies that I hated. If there's a change that I didn't mention this year or last year, you can safely assume it's a change I'm completely neutral on. But I would love to hear your take. Is there another change to the novels that you liked, or did you hate one of these changes that I liked? Let's discuss this all in the comments, and... I'm surprised how much runtime is left in this video. How am I going to fill the rest of this time? Oh, I know. In last year's D-list about Jackson's changes to Tolkien, I had another mini D-list inside it, so I guess I should do that again. So here we go. Here's a little D-list of the top things I liked about Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy. Because what better way to talk about the Hobbit trilogy than to unnecessarily extend something else you thought you were here to watch? Look, the internet doesn't need another person to examine what went wrong with the Hobbit trilogy. Plenty of people have discussed the misguided drive to turn one book into 3 movies, and the impossible task of serving the diametrically opposed dual masters of faithful Hobbit adaptation and tonal Lord of the Rings prequel, leading to a movie that weirdly rushes through what's in the book in favor of dragging out what's not in the book, and it applies world-changing stakes to this personal quest, but it still tries to be a children's story, so it shoehorns in the cartooniest action sequences since the beginning of Pirates 2, throwing 2 tones at each other, resulting in a mess. The internet doesn't need someone else to say all that. But it can't be stressed enough that adapting The Hobbit into the Lord of the Rings film world was an impossible task. It's very likely that the only way to do a good Hobbit adaptation in the same franchise as a good Lord of the Rings adaptation is to do The Hobbit first, so the tonal shifts into Lord of the Rings can build on the tone of The Hobbit. Again, that's why you have Bombadil. But regardless of how misguided the task was, these are the movies we have. And when you dig through the mess, there are quite a few shining gems in these movies, and I'm going to list some of them. Now, these aren't all changes. Some of these are just things that were adapted particularly well, but these are the aspects that keep me going through the Hobbit movies. Number 6. Bilbo at Rivendell. Okay, the Shards of Narsil and the Ring Tapestry were a little over the top, but look at Bilbo's face here. Look at the peace he feels in Rivendell. It might be even more peace than he feels at home. You look at this and you're like, yeah, of course Bilbo's gonna retire there. For a scene that's basically all just B-roll and establishing shots, this is a really nice little moment and really helps you get inside the Hobbit's head. And one of the additions to the movie that I really like is this little conversation between Bilbo and Elrond.
Not with your companions. I shan't be missed.
For one thing, I like that this sets up a friendship between Bilbo and Elrond.
I've heard that hobbits are very resilient. Really?
But even more importantly, I like that this gives Bilbo the choice of abandoning the quest. The option to just stay in Rivendell because, yeah, that's an option worth considering. I mean, have you seen the way the dwarves have been treating him? And have you seen the way he reacts to Rivendell?
You are very welcome to stay here, if that is your wish.
And that makes it all the better when Bilbo actually does specifically choose, to stay with the dwarves and help them on their adventure.
You don't have one? A home? It was taken from you. but I will help you take it back if I can.
See, I don't dislike everything that was added to the movies. I really like the stuff that fleshes out the characters and feels true to their spirits. Number 5, Misty Mountains Cold.
Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old.
Look, I said it last year and I'll say it again. I don't think there's ever been a bad version of this song. Every adaptation has their own take on Far Over the Misty Mountains Cold, and they're all great. This one is still not my favorite, as I addressed last year, but it's really good. It's haunting, it's chilling, it's just full of that mystery that entices Bilbo, but still kind of scares him. It's a really good part. Number 4, making Durin's Day predictable. Okay, this might be the single biggest change to Tolkien's lore in the Hobbit trilogy, but I think this was the right call to make. See, in the book, when they find out that the secret passage can be found on Durin's Day, Thorin is not encouraged because it lies beyond their skill to predict when Durin's Day will come next. In the movie, on the other hand, they just know when it is.
Summer is passing. Durin's Day will soon be upon us.
We still have time.
Time for what?
To find the entrance.
I think this was the right call because it not only gives the quest a clear ticking clock, it also makes it feel like much less of a coincidence that they happen to be in the right spot on the right day. Obviously, that coincidental element worked fine for a children's fairy story, but for a movie that's a prequel to movies that took themselves much more seriously, I don't think it would have flown. Number 3, the subtle hints about Sauron. So in The Hobbit, Gandalf occasionally mentions the Necromancer. He's basically just an off-screen presence to give Gandalf something else to do to get him away from the dwarves. In Lord of the Rings, it's revealed that the Necromancer was actually Sauron regaining his power. This is a retcon, but it is canon, so it's worth addressing if you're adapting The Hobbit into a medium that you've already adapted Lord of the Rings into. And early on in the movies, there are some pretty good acknowledgments of that. There are subtle hints that Sauron is coming back.
Since when do mountain trolls venture this far south?
Ooh, not for an age. Not since a darker power ruled these lands.
I like that this noteworthy rise of evil in Middle-earth is tied to Sauron. I just wish they had left it to these subtle hints and not put so much focus on dealing with him, taking that away from dealing with, the actual plot of The Hobbit. Like, they could have had one scene of Gandalf fighting with the Necromancer or something, and then as he's driven away from Mirkwood, that's when Gandalf finds out, oh my god, I think it was Sauron. Or they could have just had that all off camera. Gandalf shows back up at the Battle of Five Armies. They're like, hey, how is the Necromancer? And it's like, graver than I feared. But that's not your concern. They could have kept it subtle and kept it Easter eggy and not just had so much of the focus of this story about Bilbo going with the dwarves, focusing on a villain who's not really directly affecting the story. Look, I swear I'm trying to talk about only what I like about the movies. It's just that the things I like sometimes then go a few steps too far into territory that I don't like, and I really think only a couple of tweaks could have kept them on track. But what you gonna do? Number 2, Riddles in the Dark. This scene is just really done well. Like, they basically just take the text from the book, adapt it pretty faithfully, and just do it really well. It's just, Martin Freeman is a great Bilbo, Andy Serkis is of course a great Gollum, the scene is done with the right amount of tension and humor. It's just a really good production of this chapter. This scene is so good. This whole movie could have been this good, but at least we have this scene.
30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still. Teeth?
And it's technically a little bit later, but as an extension, the pity that stays Bilbo's hand is also handled really well. Like, it's all just communicated visually, like, you see Bilbo, you see him think about stabbing Gollum, you see how pathetic Gollum looks, you see Bilbo change his mind and just make a break for it. It's like, it's so well done. There was so much skill and talent behind this movie, and when it's firing on all cylinders, it's really firing on all cylinders. Riddles in the Dark is the most pivotal chapter of not only The Hobbit, but basically the entire fate of Middle-earth. And if they had screwed this up, it would have been basically unforgivable. I think they knew that, and I think that's why they were extra careful to get this one right. And my number one favorite thing about Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy, Martin Freeman as Bilbo. A perfect casting choice that elevates every scene he's in, which only makes the scenes that don't focus on Bilbo all the more disappointing. But not only is Martin Freeman great as Bilbo, he was literally my first choice for the role. I kid you not, when I saw the Hitchhiker's Guide movie in 2005, I took one look at Martin Freeman as Arthur Dent and thought to myself, that guy should play young Bilbo if they ever do The Hobbit. And then they announced it was actually happening, and I was just so excited, and he didn't disappoint me. When I was talking about my favorite Hobbit adaptation last year, I talked about how as long as you have a good Bilbo, a lot of the rest of it can fall into place. And they have a really good Bilbo here. And then the movie is just weighed down by other stuff that doesn't have to do with Bilbo. And that's why a lot of the fan edits that cut out the extraneous stuff and cut it down to just the story as based on the book, a lot of them work really well. They don't solve all my problems with these movies, but bringing it back to the core does make these movies a lot more enjoyable. And Martin Freeman goes a long way to making these movies as watchable as they are, however watchable that is to you. Martin Freeman is such a good Bilbo, and even though I have plenty of issues with this trilogy, I'm glad I got his performance. Well, that's enough discussion of the Jackson trilogies for this month. Next week, we will be discussing the other movies based on Tolkien's writings. No, not those ones. We covered those last year. I'm talking about the other movies. Brace yourself, this is going to get stranger than you might think. But until then, this is Dave, signing off.